Well, meanwhile, in a world first, over 250 media outlets around the world will be turning their screens or pages black, using their airwaves to broadcast a protest against the killing of journalists in Gaza. Head of the Middle East desk at Reporters Without Borders, Jonathan Dagger, joins us now. Jonathan, firstly, tell us more about this action.
Yes, good morning. So this action is the latest in a series of steps that we've been taking, that the world has been taking really, in order to mount the pressure and to stop the massacre, the senseless massacre of journalists that we've been seeing in Gaza since October 2023. According to our numbers, the Israeli army has killed more than 210 journalists in the past 23 months, nearly 2 years. And today we're saying enough. We've been saying enough for months, for 2 years, but today we're joined by more than 250 media outlets who are calling for the urgent protection of Palestinian journalists in Gaza, for an end to impunity that allows these crimes to continue, the impunity of the Israeli army. We are calling for independent access to the international press to Gaza, and we are calling on host nations to welcome in Palestinian journalists who are wishing to leave Gaza for safety, at least temporarily, because some of them really need to today.
But I mean, Israel obviously doesn't care about journalists. It's deliberately targeted them. We've seen that. So who are you calling on?
We're calling on the international community. We're calling on, first of all, media outlets today are saying we have the right to send our journalists, and the journalists we are already working in the Gaza Strip, and that's very important. They have the right to be protected. They should not be targeted. Journalists are not targets. Last week alone, it was Monday morning, exactly 1 week ago, and Israeli forces killed 5 journalists in the Gaza Strip, 5 journalists who were just doing their job. According to our analysis, there were 2 separate strikes on the same location where the journalists were found. And this just shows intention. This shows targeting, according to everything that we've seen. And unless we speak up, unless the pressure mounts, this massacre is going to continue. We've already submitted 4 complaints to the International Criminal Court. We, as RSF, have submitted 4 complaints to the International Criminal Court, detailing information about these strikes, about these attacks, calling on the court to investigate and to hold to account the perpetrators of these crimes. We've already called on the UN Security Council to apply Resolution 2222. We're asking for an urgent meeting from the UN Security Council in order to resolve this issue once and for all. Of course, nation states have diplomatic levers, they have power, they have influence, and they should be using it at full force today to pressure the Israeli government to stop the massacre of journalists.
But Israel, of course, would contradict us and say, well, they don't actually target journalists, except those that they claim have links.
Well, first of all, they don't actually always say they don't target journalists, because sometimes they do acknowledge targeting journalists and they give an excuse or justification. And according to our investigations of these, I would call them elements that the Israeli army provides, and there are very few. We've found contradictions in them. They won't tell us the truthfulness. They won't tell us the source. And so they are not at all sufficient to slander journalists, to call them terrorists, but also to justify their killing. This is not a license to kill. Sometimes there is no response, or really a non-response, I would call it. And according to our investigation, among these 220 journalists that we're talking about today, we know, because again, it's important to remind that Gaza is blocked off and investigations today in Gaza are very difficult, but for at least 56 of those journalists, we know where they were and what they were doing, and we have elements that show testimonies and proof and evidence and videos and footage that show that they were targeted while doing their job or because they were journalists. And once we investigate, I'm sure this number will be much, much higher.
Indeed, as you say, not one international journalist has been allowed into Gaza since Israel started its war.
They are allowed access. Some have been allowed access embedded with the Israeli army. This means that they accompany the army, but that means they're also submitted to the restrictions of the army. They can only see what the army wants them to see, and they're submitted to a lot of censorship. This is not at all sufficient. What we're calling for is independent access to journalists. There are journalists in Gaza who are working. They should be protected at all costs, but they have the right to be joined by their colleagues from the international community, from the international press, who have the right to go in and work. Because, we talk a lot about the journalists who were killed, we talk about the massacres, we talk about the injuries, we talk about the displacement. We don't talk enough about the sheer exhaustion that journalists are going through in Gaza. They have no access to water, to food, very limited access to water and food, but there is a famine happening and journalists are suffering because of that. They also have to take care of their families at the same time. The vast majority of them are displaced and living in tents. They live in intense fear. They have been receiving threats. All of that is part of the media blackout that is being orchestrated on the Gaza Strip, and it is time for it to end once and for all.
Indeed, and yet through their work we have seen so much of the absolute destruction and annihilation taking place in Gaza. It's pretty much unprecedented, this attack on journalists in the world.
we've never seen these numbers in the 21st century in such a small territory in such a small amount of time. This is really unprecedented. And at RSF, when a journalist is killed, this is an emergency for us. We stop everything and we investigate and we denounce and we seek justice and we contact the family. And we've been having an emergency nearly day in, day out, or at least every week for the past 2 years. This is a pace we've never seen. And what's worse is that usually when a journalist is killed, there is almost unanimity that this is wrong. But now, for the first time, I would say, when a journalist is killed, we receive questions of the sort, well, how do you know they were journalists? Or maybe they should have been killed, or like it's implied, maybe it's not said that way. But sometimes it even is. And maybe what's great about today's action, the fact that there are more than 250 media outlets joining us and Avaz in saying this massacre needs to stop. It's also a show of solidarity with these journalists, with our colleagues in the Gaza Strip, and it's proof that the propaganda to slander these journalists has failed because we are in solidarity with these journalists and we believe that they should be protected.
How do you think international media has reported the war on Gaza? Has it done a fair job?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's controversial to say that no, and there are a lot of reasons. We could speak for hours about the reasons, but one reason that I would really like to highlight is the intense pressure also that is on a lot of well-meaning journalists who are trying to do this job. There's a lot of political pressure. We've seen this pressure on media outlets. We've seen it on journalists. We've also seen it in the courts. We've seen pressure on. I spoke about our complaints to the ICC, but the ICC itself is under political pressure. There is a lot of pressure from all sides, and that is just the way impunity functions. In fact, that is why this massacre is allowed to continue and why it's continuing to take place. But no, of course not. Today we're saying this massacre should end. This is something that we should have said every day. We have been saying it every day, but it should have been loud since day one. It should not be coming in nearly 2 years later. And I'm afraid it might not even be enough, so it needs to continue.
And of course, Reporters Without Borders taking this action. Let's leave maybe people with an idea of what action they can take. Can other people, non-journalists, how can they show their support for things like this?
Listen to Gaza's journalists, amplify them, call for their protection. This is very important because attacks on journalists anywhere in the world,
through boycotts,
of course, all the political actions. But what I would like to say most of all is attacks on journalists. The reason we are defending journalists is not because they're more important than other people. Everyone needs protection. Every civilian deserves protection, merits it. Doctors, nurses, civilians, everyone. But the reason we are speaking about journalists today is because journalists provide the crucial function of being witnesses on the ground. Journalists are on the ground. They are our eyes and ears. They are our witnesses to all the other crimes and massacres and war crimes that are happening today in Gaza. And when a journalist is attacked, it's an attack on Palestinian journalists, on the press in general, on Palestinians in general, but of course it's also an attack on the right of everyone anywhere in the world to be informed. Gaza is riveting public opinion. It's at the center of nearly every public or political debate that we've seen in elections around the world. The public has the right to know, to have accurate, diverse, independent information that's coming from the Gaza Strip. And the media blackout that's being orchestrated by Israeli forces is an attack on that. It is a direct attack on our democracies and their foundations.
Indeed, so those black pages to literally show in very visual terms the blackout that is happening. Jonathan Dagger of Reporters Without